My name is Linda, and I am 38 years old, and I live in a quiet part of London in the United Kingdom, where most people just want to get through their day without any trouble from the people living next door. For most of my life, I have been the kind of person who keeps my head down and works hard, because I believe that if you do not bother anyone else, then nobody should bother you in return. I have a nice little house that I have worked very hard to pay for, and I take pride in my small garden and my routine. I work as a freelance editor, which means I spend a lot of my time inside my home office looking at a computer screen and making sure that other people's words make sense and look good on the page. Because I work from home, I see a lot of what goes on in my neighborhood, and I am very aware of the different personalities that make up our street. My life is not exciting by most people's standards, but it was peaceful, and that was exactly how I liked it, until the people next door decided that I was going to be their primary target for entertainment. The neighbors in question are a mother and her adult daughter who seem to have nothing better to do than sit outside on their front step and criticize everyone who walks by. The mother's name is Sheila, and she is a woman who always seems to have a cigarette in one hand and a can of cheap lager in the other even when it is 10 o'clock in the morning. Her daughter, whose name is Tiffany, is basically a younger version of her mother, and they spend their entire day gossiping and shouting at people. I am a woman who carries some extra weight, and I have never been the type of person who fits into the cool or popular crowd. I do not smoke, and I do not drink, and I certainly do not spend my afternoons sitting on the pavement talking about who is sleeping with who or who owes money to the local shop. Because I am different from them, they decided a long time ago that they did not like me. At first, it started with just dirty looks when I would go out to get my mail or when I would come home with my groceries. I could feel their eyes on my back as I walked from my car to my front door, and I could hear them whispering and laughing as soon as I turned my back. It was uncomfortable, but I figured that as long as they stayed on their side of the property line, I could just ignore them. I have always been a firm believer in the idea that what other people think of me is none of my business. However, their behavior began to get worse as the months went by. The whispering turned into loud comments that were clearly meant for me to hear. They started calling me names related to my size, and they would use words like fat and disgusting whenever I was within earshot. They would call me Mr. Blobby, which is a character from an old television show that was famous for being a large, round, pink creature. It hurt my feelings, of course, because nobody likes to be made fun of for how they look, but I refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing me upset. I would just keep my head up and walk into my house and lock the door behind me. I thought that if I did not react, they would eventually get bored and find someone else to pick on. But that is the thing about bullies, because when they do not get a reaction, they often decide to turn up the heat until they finally get the explosion they are looking for. They started playing loud music late at night right against the wall that we share. They would throw their cigarette butts over the fence into my garden, where I spent hours trying to grow my flowers. I would wake up in the morning and find my beautiful roses covered in ash and plastic filters. It was heartbreaking, but I still tried to be the bigger person. I even tried to be nice to them once or twice by saying hello or commenting on the weather, but Sheila would just blow smoke in my direction and tell me to mind my own business. I realized then that there was no reasoning with people like that. They lived in social housing, which means their rent was subsidized by the government, and they did not seem to have any respect for the neighborhood or the people who actually worked to live there. My life became a series of small battles where I was always on the losing side. I started to feel a sense of dread every time I had to leave my house. I would look through the peephole of my front door to see if they were outside before I dared to go out to my car. My home, which was supposed to be my sanctuary, had become a place where I felt trapped and hunted. I noticed that my mental health was starting to suffer because I was always on edge and waiting for the next insult or the next piece of trash to be thrown over my fence. I tried to talk to some of the other neighbors about it, but most of them were also afraid of Sheila and Tiffany. They told me that it was better to just keep the peace and not make a scene because Sheila had a reputation for being violent if she was challenged. This made me feel even more isolated and alone in my own community. I started to wonder if I should just move away and leave the home I loved, but I did not see why I should be the one to leave when I was not doing anything wrong. The situation reached a breaking point on a Tuesday afternoon in early spring. The sun was out and I had a lot of work to do, but I needed to run to the store to get some supplies for dinner. I checked the window and saw that the front of their house was empty, so I thought it was safe to go. I grabbed my keys and my purse and walked out to my car, which was parked on the street right in front of my house. Just as I was opening the car door, Sheila and Tiffany came flying out of their front door like they had been waiting for me. They started screaming insults at me before I could even get inside the vehicle. I tried to ignore them like I always did, but then they said something that changed everything. They did not just call me fat this time. They pointed their fingers at me and started screaming that I was a nonce and a pedophile. In the United Kingdom, those are the most dangerous words you can say about someone. They are accusations that can get you killed or get your house burned down. They started shouting, it loud enough for the whole street to hear, and they were telling people to keep their children away from me because I was a danger to society. I felt the blood drain from my face, and my heart started racing so fast I thought I was going to have a heart attack. This was not just bullying anymore. This was a direct attack on my character and my safety. They were standing there laughing and pointing while I stood frozen by my car door. They thought it was a huge joke, and they thought they could say whatever they wanted without any consequences. But they made one very big mistake that they did not know about yet. A few months ago, because I was tired of the trash being thrown in my garden, I had installed a high-quality closed-circuit television system. I had a camera that covered the entire front of my house and the street where my car was parked, and I also had a smart doorbell that recorded audio and video in high definition. Every single word they screamed and every hateful gesture they made was being recorded and saved to a cloud server in real time. I did not say a single word back to them. I got into my car and I drove away with my hands shaking on the steering wheel. I did not even go to the store. I drove to a park a few miles away and sat in my car and cried for an hour. I felt so dirty and so ashamed even though I knew I had done nothing wrong. I knew that if people started believing those lies, my life would be over. I would never be able to show my face in public again. When I finally calmed down, I realized that I could not let this go. If I let them get away with this, they would only get bolder, and eventually, they would do something even worse. I went back home, and I did not look at them as I went inside. I went straight to my computer, and I downloaded the footage from the closed-circuit television. The video was crystal clear, and the audio was perfect. You could hear every single syllable of the horrible names they called me, and you could see the malice on their faces. I felt a strange sense of calm come over me as I watched the video. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I had power. I called the non-emergency police line and told them that I wanted to report a case of harassment and hate speech. They told me that an officer would come by my house later that evening to take a statement. When the police arrived, I showed them the footage. The two officers who came were very professional, and they looked disgusted when they heard what Sheila and Tiffany had been shouting. They asked me what I wanted to happen, and I told them very honestly that I just wanted the harassment to stop. I told them that I was afraid to leave my house and that I was worried about my safety because of the false accusations they were making. The police took a copy of the footage and told me they would be speaking to the neighbors. I watched from my window as they went next door. Sheila tried to act like she was the victim, and she started screaming at the police too, but they were not having it. They told her that there was video evidence of her behavior and that she needed to be very careful about what she did next. A few days later, I was informed that the police had issued a 2-year community order against Sheila and her daughter. This meant that they were legally forbidden from harassing me or making any contact with me. If they broke this order, they would be arrested and sent straight to a court of law. I thought that this would be the end of it, but I was wrong. Sheila was not the type of person to learn a lesson. Instead of stopping, she just found new ways to be a nightmare. She knew she could not scream at me anymore, so she started doing things that were harder to prove, but still made my life miserable. She would stand in her front garden and stare at my windows for hours on end just to let me know she was watching. She would have her friends come over, and they would all sit outside and whisper while looking at my house. It was a psychological war, and I was starting to lose my mind. I realized that the police order was just a piece of paper to her, and she did not respect the law any more than she respected me. I knew I had to do something more. I started thinking about the fact that they lived in social housing. In the United Kingdom, social housing comes with a lot of rules, and one of those rules is that you have to be a good neighbor. If you are involved in criminal activity, or if you are harassing your neighbors, you can be evicted. I decided to contact their housing officer and tell them everything that had been happening. I sent a long email detailing the years of abuse, and I attached the police reports and the video footage of them calling me a pedophile. I explained that I was a law-abiding citizen who paid my taxes and that I deserved to live in peace. The housing officer got back to me very quickly and said that they were launching an official investigation into the conduct of the tenants next door. I felt a glimmer of hope for the first time in years. However, this was when things got really bad for me. Sheila somehow found out that I had contacted the housing association, and she went into a blind rage. One night, I was sitting in my living room when I heard a loud crash. Someone had thrown a heavy brick through my front window. Glass went everywhere, and I was lucky that I was not sitting closer to the window, or I could have been seriously injured. I called the police again, but by the time they got there, Sheila was back inside her house, and there were no witnesses who were willing to speak up. The police said they could not prove it was her, even though we all knew it was. I felt like I was back at square one. I had to board up my window with plywood, and I felt like I was living in a bunker. I was terrified that she was going to set my house on fire next. I spent several nights sleeping on the floor of my hallway because I was afraid of being near the windows. This was the lowest point of my life. I felt like the bullies were winning and that there was nothing I could do to stop them. I felt like the system was failing me and that I was going to be forced out of my own home by a woman who had no respect for anyone. I almost gave up. I almost called a real estate agent to put my house on the market just so I could escape the nightmare. But then I remembered the look on Sheila's face when she was screaming at me. I remembered how much she enjoyed making me feel small, and I decided that I was not going to let her win. I decided to double down on my efforts. I spent some money and I bought even more cameras. I put them in every corner of my property so there were no blind spots. I also reached out to the housing officer again and told them about the brick and the constant intimidation. I told them that I was living in fear for my life and that if they did not do something, I would take the story to the local newspapers and tell everyone how the housing association was allowing a violent harasser to live in their property. That seemed to get their attention. A few weeks later, the housing officer informed me that they had finished their investigation and that they had decided to serve Sheila and Tiffany with a notice to quit. This meant they had 2 months to find a new place to live before they would be forcibly evicted by the bailiffs. I felt a huge weight lift off my shoulders, but I also knew that the next 2 months were going to be the most dangerous time of all. When the housing officer arrived at their door to serve the official notice, things went from bad to worse very quickly. I was watching through my security camera as the officer knocked on the door. Sheila opened it, and as soon as she realized what was happening, she started screaming at the top of her lungs. She was using every curse word in the book, and she was waving her arms around like a madwoman. The housing officer tried to remain calm, but Sheila was getting more and more aggressive. Then suddenly, Sheila lunged forward and tried to strike the housing officer in the face. She was screaming that she was not going anywhere and that she would kill anyone who tried to make her leave. The housing officer quickly backed away and called for emergency police assistance. Within minutes, 3 police cars arrived with their sirens blaring and their lights flashing. The entire street came out to watch the drama unfold. Sheila and Tiffany were both outside now, and they were fighting with the police officers. It took 4 officers to get Sheila into handcuffs because she was kicking and biting and acting like a wild animal. While they were arresting her and her daughter for the assault on the housing officer, and the officers had to go inside the house to make sure there was no one else there and to secure the property. That was when they made another discovery that Sheila was not expecting. Sitting right there on the kitchen table in plain view was a large amount of marijuana and some scales and small plastic bags. In the United Kingdom, marijuana is still an illegal substance, and having that much of it along with scales suggests that someone is involved in selling it. The police immediately called for a search warrant, and they spent the next several hours searching the entire house. They found even more drugs hidden in the bedrooms and a large amount of cash that could not be explained. It turns out that Sheila and her daughter were not just bullies, but they were also small-time drug dealers, which explained why they had so many strange people coming and going from their house at all hours of the night. Because of the violence of the arrest and the amount of drugs found, the situation became much more serious than a simple eviction. Sheila was taken to the police station and charged with multiple offenses, including assault on a public official, assault on a police officer, and possession with intent to supply a controlled substance. Tiffany was also charged with drug offenses and for obstructing the police. The Housing Association did not wait for the 2 months to be up. They went to court the very next day and got an emergency order to take possession of the property immediately because of the criminal activity taking place inside. I watched from my window as a moving crew arrived a few days later to pack up their belongings. They did not have many nice things, and most of it was just tossed into the back of a truck. The house was then boarded up with heavy metal shutters to prevent anyone from breaking back in. It was finally over. The silence that followed was the most beautiful thing I had ever heard. I could finally walk out to my car without being called a name. I could sit in my garden without smelling cigarette smoke or finding trash in my flowers. But the story does not end there. A few months later, I received a letter in the mail informing me that the case had gone to the Crown Court. Because of her long history of previous offenses and the violent nature of the assault on the housing officer, Sheila was sentenced to 12 months in prison. Tiffany received a suspended sentence and a community service order, but she was not allowed to return to the neighborhood. The Housing Association also blacklisted both of them, which means they will never be able to live in social housing in this part of London ever again. They have lost everything because they could not stop themselves from being hateful to a neighbor who had never done anything to them. I feel a strange mix of emotions about the whole thing. Part of me feels sorry for them because they have ruined their lives over something so stupid. All I ever wanted was for them to stop harassing me. I did not set out to send anyone to prison or to make them homeless. I just wanted to be able to live my life in peace. But another part of me knows that they brought this all on themselves. They were the ones who chose to be bullies, and they were the ones who chose to break the law. They thought that I was weak because I did not fight back with my fists or with insults, but they found out that I was stronger than they thought. I used the systems that are in place to protect people, and it worked. The neighborhood is much different now. People are starting to come out of their houses more, and there is a sense of community that was missing before. I have even made friends with the family that moved into the house on the other side of me, and we sometimes have tea together in the afternoon. I am no longer the woman who hides behind her curtains or looks through the peephole before she leaves. I have reclaimed my home and my life. There was one final twist to the story that I did not see coming. About a week ago, I was cleaning out some of the old bushes along the fence line between my property and Sheila's old house. As I was digging in the dirt, I found a small metal box that had been buried there. I opened it up, and inside was a collection of old photographs and letters. It turns out that Sheila's family had lived in that house for a long time, and the letters were from her mother to her father. They were full of hope and dreams for a good life. It made me realize that somewhere along the way that family had lost their way and turned their bitterness into a weapon against the world. I did not keep the box. I took it to the local historical society because I thought it was important to preserve the history of the area, even if the people involved were not very nice. It felt like the final act of closing a door on a very dark chapter of my life. I am 38 years old, and I have learned that justice does not always happen quickly, but if you are patient and you do the right thing, it does happen eventually. I am proud of myself for standing up for what was right and for not letting the bullies win. My house is now a place of joy again, and the roses in my garden are finally blooming without any ash on their petals. I have learned that the best revenge is not to become like the people who hurt you, but to live a life that is so good and so peaceful that their hatred has no place in it. I still have my security cameras, and I still check them every now and then, but now when I look at the screen, I just see a quiet street and a happy woman coming home to a house that she loves. The people in the neighborhood now respect me, and some have even thanked me for being the one to finally take a stand against the family that had been terrorizing the street for so long. It is a good feeling to know that my actions helped more than just myself. I hope that Sheila and Tiffany use their time away to think about how they treat people, but even if they do not, I know that they are no longer my problem. I have moved on, and I am stronger than I ever was before. The sounds of the City of London continue on outside my door, but inside it is quiet and calm and exactly the way I want it to be. I am Linda, and I have my life back. For a long time, I thought about what it meant to be a neighbor. I used to think it just meant living next to someone, but now I know it means looking out for one another and making sure that everyone feels safe. I have become more involved in my local community, and I even joined a group that helps maintain the local park. I want to make sure that my little corner of the world remains a place where people can be happy and where bullies are not allowed to thrive. Sometimes I look at the empty house next door and I think about how different things could have been if Sheila had just been a little bit kinder. She could still be living there, and she could be enjoying the same sunshine that I am enjoying. But she chose hate over kindness, and she paid the price for it. It is a lesson that I will never forget, and I hope that anyone else who is going through a similar situation knows that they do not have to just take the abuse. There are ways to fight back that do not involve violence, and there are people who will help you if you are brave enough to ask. The law is there for a reason, and even though it can be slow, it can also be very powerful when it is used correctly. I am glad that I had my cameras, because without that evidence it would have just been my word against hers, and people like Sheila are very good at lying. But a video does not lie, and the truth is a very difficult thing to beat in a court of law. I am now looking forward to the future, and I am even thinking about doing some renovations to my house to make it even more of a dream home. I might even paint the front door a bright and happy color like yellow or light blue to celebrate my new beginning. I have spent too many years feeling gray and dull because of the people next door, and it is time for me to shine. My journey through this ordeal has changed me in many ways, but mostly it has taught me that I am capable of more than I thought. I am not just a fat woman who can be pushed around. I am a strong and capable woman who knows how to protect herself and her property. I have found my voice, and I am never going to let anyone silence it again. The United Kingdom is my home and London is my city, and I have as much right to be here as anyone else. I will continue to work hard, and I will continue to be a good person because that is who I am at my core. And if I ever have to deal with a bully again, I will know exactly what to do. I will record the facts and I will tell the truth, and I will let the consequences fall where they may. This experience has been a long and difficult road, but I have come out the other side as a winner, and that is all that matters. The story of my revenge is not one of violence or anger, but one of justice and peace. It is a story about how one woman decided she had had enough, and she used her brain and the law to win her life back. And as I sit here typing these words, I can hear the birds singing in my garden, and I know that I am exactly where I am supposed to be. Life is good, and for the first time in a very long time, I am truly happy. My neighbors finally crossed the line, and in doing so, they gave me the chance to prove to myself and to the world that I am a force to be reckoned with and that I will not be broken. I hope that whoever is reading this or hearing this takes some comfort in knowing that there is always a way out of a bad situation and that you should never give up hope, because you never know when the turning point is going to come, and when it does you need to be ready to take action and reclaim your happiness. It is never too late to stand up for yourself, and it is never too late to make things right. I am living proof of that, and I am so grateful for the peace that I have finally found. The sun is setting over the rooftops of London, and as I close my eyes, I can finally breathe easy knowing that I am safe and that my home is truly mine once again. The long struggle is over, and the future is bright and full of possibilities that I never thought were possible before this all started. I have won my battle, and I am ready for whatever comes next in this beautiful life that I have built for myself. My name is Linda, and I am free.